Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, joined again by Logos. We're here to discuss the recent Blaze Summit, where they Tucker Carlson interviewed the Republican contenders, not including Trump. And Logos quite rightly said we needed to jump on this to comment on it. And we have a lot of interesting things to say. So why don't you start off, Logos, with how you want to take this?
Yeah, so when I was watching this thing the day of, because I had to work and I got home late, of course, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It took me a second to internalize what I was hearing. And it turned out that this whole thing was a story in three parts. But let's back up a second. When we review this thing, I don't care about what the politicians say. I don't really care about what the Tucker interviews say. I mean, Todd might have covered some of that. I don't know how he's going to go into it, but the way I went into it was I care more about the right-wing commentary on the interviews from the Blaze people than I do the interviews themselves. Politicians are in general older than most people. They're probably out of touch. Tucker, he's probably one of the best we've got, if not the best we've got. He's still a little older and out of touch. But things are going to be missed. The commentators are there to catch it. They're there to grab the young audiences and so forth. And you kind of get this discrepancy near the end. I think this is just after Pence, when they start talking about raising the question, does the candidate know what time it is? And you can see in the title of our video, I hope, do we know what time it is? Because this is going to be like essential to my issue with the whole commentary on the thing. Basically, I have a commentary in three parts. It's funny how this happens chronologically throughout the night too, right? So the first part is a bunch of right-wing shibboleths we're going to talk about with the Tim Scott interview. They interview Tim Scott after the Tucker Carlson interview. They give commentary on Tim Scott. Crazy stuff. Later on, I forget who this was after. I think it was after Asa Hutchinson. They talk about corporations, the libertarian mindset, how, Glenn Beck says we were 25 minutes, we're saying about corporations what CNN said 25 years ago, and we've come to our senses. The third act, which we'll go over the timestamps and stuff for, is the do you know what time it is discussion, basically. And so it's like, here's a bunch of shibboleths that I think they're very wrong about and hurting the country, that they desperately need to catch up on. They admit they're 25 years late on a very crucial thing that is costing them one, if not two generations of people before they can get a handle on this. And then three, they want to act like the avant-garde, cutting edge commentators. Like, do they know what time it is? Blah, 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 blah. It's like they've already admitted to being 25 years late on some pretty big things. I argue they're still late on some big things. And now they kind of want to lecture everybody else about knowing what time it is. I don't think there's there for that. So we can just start on this and see where it goes, I guess.
Okay, so we have two timestamps about what Tim says. So do you want to do one and two or just one?
It's up to you. We can just start one and then talk about it if we see something interesting. We can go into both of them and talk about both of them. Whatever.
Sure. All right, we'll just take it by ear. So here we go.
The primary boss I have are only South Carolinians. Whether you vote for me or not, I work for the people. As President of the United States, I will work for the people. Let me tell you what I'm running on, and this is really simple. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. Number one. Number two, my mother worked 16 hours a day as a nurse's aide. She'd come home after changing bedpans and rolling patients, and she taught me one very valuable lesson. There is dignity in all work. Therefore, if you're able-bodied, you work. That's called America. Number three, if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail, period. Number four, men should compete in sports against men. And number five, our southern border is the major national security issue our nation faces. Closing our southern border because of the national security risk that it poses is absolutely in America's best interest. period.
Okay, there's the 5.
Okay, that's it.
So we can actually skip to number 2 because I don't want to talk about Tim Scott too much. This is context for what they're actually going to talk about in clip 2 of the interview. I forgot about that. So let's watch that one first.
Okay, yeah.
He does.
Just get the share screen up here, and we can do it.
What he was talking about was, he is the reason why the media doesn't like this, like him, is because what he says is true. I am proof positive that what the left says is a lie.
Yeah.
That you can't make it. Yes, you can.
Yeah. Oh, and it's, if you take Clarence Thomas's concurrence from the affirmative action case, and you look at that, it sounds a lot like Tim Scott when he talks about race issues, which is a huge compliment, right? Like,
the biggest.
Yeah, someone who will take this on for themselves, someone who takes responsibility for their own lives, and also tells everyone that they can do it too. That messaging is incredibly important at this time. And, probably there's nobody better in the field to present that message to the American people than Tim Scott. He can make that point.
Self-reliance is America.
Okay,
We are
pause for a
moving
second.
towards a much more globalist, much more European-centric kind of lifestyle, really. That's what's different. Here, you're self-reliant. Here, you don't ask for permission. You just do it.
Yeah.
And as long as you're not hurting people, killing people, poisoning people, you can do it.
Yeah, we've gone through a weird transition.
Okay, let's
where
pause it
no
for a second.
longer is that kind of the.
Okay, what?
Let's pause it for a second. Okay, so let's break it up there. A, so we're not using too many of their clips or whatever. We can give commentary on what we're watching. But B, I think we've seen enough to kind of get started. What do you think about what you've just seen?
There's a lot to go on here. So let's start with the first thing. Glenn Beck says Tim was proof positive that with the left narrative, it's not true. First of all, I know plenty of people, myself included, are proof positive that the conservative talking point is not true. I know plenty of talented, hardworking men that can't hack it in the system. Now, there's two contradictory narratives that the conservative has. On the one hand, the left is cheating. They're using the power of government. They're hiring all these diversity hires, especially like in organizations like the university, right? Or even now business, and we'll get to business later. But also, you're responsible for everything that happens to you and everything you do. Well, those are literally two absurd contradictions. They both cannot be true at the same time. Now, I agree that the left has, especially in the last 20 years, this whole country has had a war on men. In fact, one of the contributors, Christina Hoff Sommers, who contributes to one of these, conservative think tanks, has a book called The War on Boys. Yes, there's been a war on boys, a war on men. How is it not that they're victims of this thing? Second of all, self-reliance. This is an incredibly bastardized term, right? When Americans spoke of self-reliance in the olden days, that meant you could build your own log cabin. Could anybody in that conference cut down trees and build their own log cabin? No. They're actually all interdependent upon one, the global economy, and two, machines. So their own lack of independence, their own lack of being able to do things themselves is what is driving us towards the globalized economy, because we're not independent anymore. And we haven't been for a very long time. And it sounds good on paper, and you can pretend to be independent when you have enough money to just fly anywhere in the country, but you're not independent, right? It means self-reliant. It means that you rely on yourself to do something. But when you have to order all these specialized machine parts from all over the country to do whatever you're going to do, that's not self-reliant. That's you being dependent on an international supply chain. And to just pretend that that's not the case is ludicrous. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah, from my perspective, when I watched it, the first thing I thought of was, oh, how the tables have turned when it comes to debating with the left about, certain statistical issues. When the right debates the left about, let's say, sex or gender, and they say something like, people are born male or female, and the left says, Well, what about these exceptions, right? Turner syndrome, other chromosomal issues that affect like 0.2% of the population or something. They try out exceptions, and the right says, well, exceptions don't prove the general rule. Okay, but what do we just see here? We see that Tim Scott, the existence of a single person, proves that you can make it and the left is wrong.
Womp womp.
So instead of talking about statistics, data, trends, how is mobility actually looking in this country, right? Are children doing better than their parents? I think we've all seen the graphs of like how much wealth each generation has had when they've reached certain age milestones. So you can look at like the objective facts, or you can point to like anecdotes about like certain people who like, wow, they had all this adversity and they did great. What's everybody else's excuse? Like you can't say the exceptions like become the rule when it's convenient for you, and then say the exceptions don't morph or become the rule when it's you can't deny it to the left. Like you both have to have the same argument here when it comes to statistics and exceptions. Do we care about what's true in the vast majority of cases? Do we care about trends? Do we care about like robust facts and figures, or do we care about exceptions that are really nice for our case?
Well, I mean, to your point exactly, Logos, that's what shifted me to being a pro-labor conservative, because I don't believe in making cases for the exception. But I just didn't have the statistical data 15 years ago to realize that this was actually the way it was.
Right. I mean, these people do have the data. And so I guess we'll get to the ramifications of this later. But yeah, so the first two clips are like the very first setup thing. So most of what Tim Scott said in his 5 points, probably fine. The one thing I took exception to, and I think a lot of the audience can probably guess this, you can guess this, is like if you take out a loan, you pay it back. I'll have something to say about that a little bit later, but juxtaposing that with this, we can kind of go into the third clip now and see what's going on.
Well, I'd like to see the government pay its loans, wouldn't you, Logos?
Well, yeah, I think that's what the conservatives are going to say. And then, of course, the military budget needs to be increased again. So probably not going to happen.
Okay, third clip. We're moving there.
You work, you go to jail.
Okay, I'm gonna share screen.
Now they're talking to Tim Scott.
What?
Now they're talking to Tim Scott.
Yeah.
In sports and the southern border. What was the first one? You remember?
If you take out a loan, you pay it.
Pay it. Okay, good.
Because here's what's happening, Glenn. In the Biden administration, the radical left and the progressives continue to push their version of socialism wherever they can find it whole. The Supreme Court rules against the $400 billion student loan giveaway.
Right.
What does President Biden do just days later? He tries to do it again in a smaller amount. This is unconscionable. Why should my mother, the nurse's aide who worked for barely more than minimum wage, be stuck with my student loans?
Right.
It is not right. It's unethical.
It's also not right. I didn't go to, at 30, I could finally kind of afford university.
Yes.
So I didn't go because I couldn't afford it. My parents couldn't afford it. At 30, I enroll and then I get a divorce and I can no longer afford it.
Yes.
So why now do I have to pay for somebody else's loan who might turn out to be a doctor and make all kinds of money? I'm not crying poor mouth here. I can help.
Okay.
But the average person can't.
In America, if you take that loan out, it is just your responsibility. It's not mine. It's not yours.
Do you believe that to be true with the banks? The banks are getting all kinds of money from the Federal Reserve all the time.
Yes.
And if we don't teach them, dude, you made that deal. It's on you.
So one of the things I did is I've been working on and passed through the Senate passed through the Banking Committee legislation that simply says that.
Okay, let's pause here for a second. There'll be more. They'll do a clip of his interview on The View and whatnot, where there's some interesting things to say. But I think this is a good stopping point for the moment. What do you think about this so far?
Now, we didn't quite catch all of his final statement, but for those who watched Tim give his speech, he says at the very end, if you don't want a candidate who has Christian values, don't vote for me. And it might be later on, even in this clip, where Glenn Beck talks about Christian values. Yeah, guys, you know what the biblical values about debt are? You forgive it. Leviticus 25.
Yeah, it's a good point.
What? No, this is literally a joke, right? What's happened is the Bible, all throughout the Old Testament, and then in the New Testament, reinforces this notion that you forgive debts.
Yeah.
And so, of course, Christ then uses that and says, well, let's take this outside of money now towards the realm of sin. There's the parable of the master who forgave a servant 1,000 denarii debt, which is God the Father and then us, right? And then somebody owed the servant 100 denarii, and he didn't forgive him the debt and threw him in jail, which is somebody that has owed us a debt. And then the parable goes to say that the man who owed the 1,000 talent debt was then rearrested by the master and thrown in jail, which basically means he went to hell because he didn't forgive the debts. So this is like literally, just FYI, the exact opposite of what a biblical application would look like in the realm of the economy. The other thing I have to say is we were lied to. All these millennials that went to college because there were shovel-ready jobs on the other side. This is the best way to a middle-class life. And it just became an albatross around our necks where we couldn't pay the debts off and we didn't get anywhere. So there was a huge amount of fraud involved, deceiving the millennial generation to go to college. I mean, you're 19 years old, 18 years old. You don't know how the world works. It's not in the ex ante exchange, we're not dealing with two equals.
That's true. Things that caught my ear about what was said here. Note, he can say what he wants about how we shouldn't have bailed out the banks. We did bail out the banks. Right? The standard is a precedent. We have it. We've bailed these people out. And then what we're doing is we're bailing out a certain class of society that's basically a bunch of financial money changers. That's what they are. And when it comes to a whole bunch of people that are just trying to have kids and do the usual middle class stuff that needs doing in society, they can eat cake and deal with several hundreds more in student loan payments and make it harder to save, buy a house, do everything else. It just doesn't seem interesting. If you want to be consistent, right? What he could say is like, in principle, none of this should happen, but we've done this once. We give one more freebie, right? Here we go. The upper class gets a freebie. Low income people get a freebie with respect to student loans. Even Steven, we're reforming it when we do it, and we're going to try to make sure this never happens again. I'd respect that a whole lot. But cutting the line arbitrarily along class lines and saying, yeah, I know we help these rich people, but in principle it was bad, so screw you people in the future, not a good look. The other problem too, and here's a problem I have a problem with, is he's talking about, I hear this talked about on conservative stuff all the time, like the taxpayer didn't take out the loan, why should they have to pay off your debt? In a sense, the taxpayer is what decided how much I was going to have to take out in a loan. I don't know about you, Todd. Did you have any say over how much administrative bloat your college had?
None.
I certainly didn't. I as a teenager starting college, had no idea that I was going to school at a time when, just like healthcare, look at the graphs, I've seen them all over Twitter, right? The vast majority of our increase in healthcare costs are purely due to administrative bloat. The massive increases in college costs, guarantee you, due to administrative bloat. I saw a really interesting thread talking about how every college has a vice dean, the vice chair, the vice chancellor of some department. Nobody knows what his job description is or what he does. And you have a technical support desk with 2 people doing their best to help hundreds of requests every day. It's absolutely dysfunctional. The pyramid's been completely flipped upside down. We have a whole bunch of administrators that have graduated and they're sucking the institutions dry. It's who else other than Glenn Beck's generation is responsible for that? Right?
Yeah.
It can't be me.
No.
I haven't even gone to college. What authority do I have to decide who works there and how much I'm going to be gouged in tuition because they thought bloating the economy with a bunch of administrative bureaucrats was a good idea? Either they were complicit in it or they were asleep at the wheel. And so my counter to them is, why should I have to pay for your generation being asleep at the wheel while these institutions became completely bankrupt?
Well, the other thing I'd say too is, in the 1940s, you could have a high school education in a middle class life. It's the way the economy shifted towards the information economy since then that made this impossible. Corporations ought to pay for our college because they're the ones that forced us to radically change how we do the economy, and that high school education isn't sufficient for a middle class life anymore.
That's a good point. Yeah, one thing I always say to people on Twitter is I'm like, here's my compromise on the student loan thing. We start taxing the corporations that require college degrees for basically menial office work and start making them pay for the degrees that they're forcing on their employees. It could be like 50-50. So as college tuition goes up, it's like you pay a tax that will pay for 50% of the average, in-state, degree in your area. And so they're either going to make a choice. They're going to pocket these costs or decide that the degree's not worth it. If they decide the degree's not worth it, everybody, including conservatives, win, because the narrative is these colleges are left-wing ideologue factories or whatever. And if it goes up, if they choose to pay the costs, the left wins, because at least college is now getting cheaper for people despite all this craziness. Like, I don't know, that's a compromise I bring up. But like, what was I going to say next? No, I think that's about it.
Well, but back to my point, right? These economic
Sure.
interests only succeed because they externalize the cost of training
Yes.
their staff to the taxpayer, to the dupe who gets the student loan debt, when they're the ones that change the economy so that you have to have this, that the high school education is no longer good enough. You read letters from the Civil War, U.S. Civil War, and they're high school level educated. So from like 1860 to 1960, high school education was good enough for middle class life.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it's not good enough anymore. Well, whose fault's that? It's the captains of industry that shifted everything into the information economy, which means they have to be the ones paying for this because we have to get the degrees in management and engineering and computer science.
Well, that's a good point, because there's two shifts that have happened. One shift is that caused this administrative bloat in the first place, where, like, I got a buddy that's in sales. He's in sales for like aviation parts. He's using like Salesforce software, and he's just kind of like, chilling. He's got a sociology degree. Why? His dad got a sociology degree when he got the same job. I don't know what sociology has to do with clicking buttons on Salesforce and facilitating transactions between people buying and selling parts or building planes or whatever. But like, some bachelor's degrees required for the job, and so people get sociology for the job. Now, the first shift is where any degree was necessary for basic computer literacy skills. We're talking like Microsoft Word. We're talking, can you send an email? Do you know how to work Excel? Stuff we hope they teach you just as a basic matter, of course, in your college education. The corporations doesn't want to teach you. Within that shift, another shift happened at the same time, which overlapped and made everything way more confusing. Those sociology degrees that you would have got to do really well for yourself in sales or secretarial work or office management, that would have made you maybe the equivalent of an six-figure income, like 80,000 to 100,000 a year. Suddenly that started to become deflated when the technology was doing even more of the work. And now more of the work is like statistical analysis, engineering, coding, web development, stuff like that. And so they have the shift within the shift, and suddenly like the tech degrees are becoming valuable, and everybody's saying, learn to code. You should have got a degree in tech. You should have whatever. But think about this, like, even if you're a second gen college student, your parents are describing what worked for you. It's like, okay, or for them, it's like, well, okay, I went and got a degree in social science. I got a cool office job. I got this cool pension. I've been working for this company for like 20 years, whatever. Everything's great. They're telling their kid goes, okay, I'll go to college, get the same job, start doing the same thing my parents did. Well, now everything about that is wrong. You need a tech degree, not a social science degree. Working at the same company for 20 years is probably a terrible idea. There have been studies on this where people who stayed in the same company for like 5 years over around the time of the pandemic end up losing a huge chunk of income compared to people that just continually job hopped to kind of force promotions out of the system. So like every single thing their parents told them, even if they, went to college themselves and knew better, ended up being a lie due to how drastically the system shifted.
The other thing is the administrative bloat was driven by the production efficiency of machines. You still had to employ people, but
Right.
they were now no longer employed in productive labor because you didn't need to.
Exactly.
Which also makes this fetish of work ridiculous. I mean, we have machines that can basically work all the time. We literally don't need to be working as much as we do now. And the only reason why we do, okay, let's go back to my favorite, whipping boy, Paul Mauser in American Prosperity. We have this problem called overproduction. And once we saturate the market, we either have to turn off the factories or stimulate demand by manufacturing consent. So they decide to do that. So we're literally working for no good reason.
Yeah.
We're literally working for no good reason. So a few fat cats at the top can just skim all this cream off, when we could just saturate the market, mothball the majority of the machines, enjoy what we have, and then turn them back on when we need to.
Right. So I was going to talk about the view clip that happens later on here. I don't have notes for it. I think I cut it out because I knew this was going to take a little longer than anticipated. So let's move on to the next clips and start talking about the second part of the story. Story has 3 parts. This is still part 1.
Don't worry, Logos. We'll go as long as we need. All right. Now we got to open up the next one. Part 4.
So I wanted to talk.
Now, did you want to cover Asa squirming?
Not necessarily.
Okay, that was part 4, so we'll skip that.
Yeah, I want to make a quick comment about that for the sake of time. The debate that Asa Hutchinson and Tucker were having about the trans bill, I read it. I have a link to it. I have the PDFs. I actually read the text of the bill to see what was going on there. I've seen some trans activists and stuff saying that like the bill banned like counseling and gender affirming care and things like that. The bill always only referred to physiological concerns like surgeries, hormones, and things that actually affect the body. I will have a link to that bill they're talking about in the comments later for anybody interested, but we can move on.
Well, all I'll say is somebody brought up once that the state he comes from is basically controlled by Walmart. So there you go. Corporate capture, right, Logos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Criminal. They have these corporations. You want to talk about the 2 candidates that said we need to use our economic power. This kind of economic power is being used through organizations like the World Economic Forum and WEF and even the Democratic Party to destroy people for having an opinion. And these big corporations have all dropped all of his product and are destroying him right now. And it is absolutely criminal. And, I would hope that Tucker gets to a question today about the corruption in our government, even if they will just talk about the corruption of the cocaine at the White House. I mean, this is insane. People on the Secret Service, if that is true, then the Secret Service should be reevaluated from top to bottom.
And you
Pause it for a second. I want to make a quick comment on this.
Yeah.
How did we jump? I didn't even think about this the first 2 or 3 times I watched this through. How did we jump from corporate corruption? He's talking about Mike Lindell at the beginning for people who don't know, and like the mass coordinated corporate boycott of all of his products that happened. How do we get from like corporate corruption and collusion in the case of Mike Lindell? It just jumps out of nowhere to talking about like cocaine at the White House. What does the latter have to do with the former?
Corruption?
I mean, corruption, but he's talking about corporate corruption. Look how quickly he switched gears to talking about banal crap at the White House most people probably don't care about.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably like keeping frame. The Dems are bad, Biden's bad. Let's keep the focus on them.
I know. I guess my point here is they're about to talk about the corporations later, but I mean, look how hard it is for them to stay on track.
Oh, it also might be if we seem to be going after corporations too hard, we might look like leftists. So we want to like punch the leftists so that everybody knows we're not a leftist.
Maybe, but whatever the rationale, like at the end of the day, what's going on here is they're about to talk about how behind the 8 ball they were on corporations and corporate propaganda, corporate corruption, all of it. And he couldn't even stay on track when talking about a coordinated political corporate boycott on this guy who'd been doing business with corporations for like years until the 2016 stuff happened. His goods weren't faulty or anything like that for political reasons. All these stores all at once just like, no. It's like interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly, again, let me go back to how Republicans have related to corporate America for so long. It's basically tax cuts. We want to stimulate, economic growth. And again, I'm not against those things, but at a certain point, you have to understand we're giving tax cuts to corporations that turn around and try to implement the agenda of the left.
Right.
And if you're a candidate who doesn't understand that, right? If you're a candidate that says, "Oh, there's no such thing as corporate tyranny. Tyranny can only come from the government," then to me, you're past your prime. You need to find another line of employment.
Is the problem that that tyranny is coming from corporations, or is it that tyranny is coming from corporations banding together with government? I mean, I think this public-private partnership is the real tyranny, and it's been happening. They get the tax cuts because they have the money to lobby.
No, stop here. Middle-class people do this all the time. They just don't do it on the same scale. I already gave an example of how it happened in my locality. Second of all, okay, I just finished reading Wall Street and FDR. The thing is, the Wall Street has captured the government, but one of the things that they wanted was the use of the antitrust law after the 30s. The Sherman Antitrust Act doesn't get used much because breaking these things up is not what they want. The government, the sort of quote unquote public-minded officials that would use that to break up corporations, and that included Republicans back in the day, just got bought off. It's like, see, because Glenn still wants to rope it back into the government's at fault. Okay, the whole backdrop to this conference is like, a Christian America. Okay, Logos, I got a question for you. Which of these two institutions is mandated by God in the Bible? The government or the corporation?
All right, can you say that again?
Yeah, which of these two organizations is mandated by God in the Bible? The government or the corporation?
Is the government mandated by God? I remember he was mad that the Israelis wanted a king one time. I don't know what God said about governments.
Well,
give to
think of
Caesar
like
what
Romans,
is Caesar and
think
stuff.
of like
but-
Romans 13, right? Romans 13. Government, okay, so the Christian should obey the government because the government is a form of common grace, right? It's something that God has ordained to have some purpose in the world. So maybe I should have used the word ordained. But the corporation is not.
Right.
So again, this is the opposite of what a Christian America convention would look like. In a Christian America convention, the corporation would be seen as, okay, not necessarily illegitimate, but it wouldn't be seen as ordained, right? The state would be seen as something, or the government would be seen as something ordained by God. So this sort of like switch where it's like, no, it's the government's. No, if we actually had a America that was aligned with Christian principles, the government would throttle corporations so they couldn't do this.
I mean, there's a plurality of problems here. One is, I mean, if corporations are supposed to be such rational actors and a free market's supposed to be this great thing, how are these corporations being corrupted by the government? That's number one. I mean, if it turns out, like, we have to have a government. We can't be anarchists. The government can't go away. So if corporations have this penchant of being corrupted by the government, then the corporate structure itself is the problem. It has to be, because government's non-negotiable. That's number one. Number two is the epistemic problem. How do you know if corporations are colluding with government until long after the fact? Like, you might think the free market's going great, and then it turns out like 5 years later, oh, by the way, the FBI and the CIA or whoever were like colluding with social media sites to like, prune things and make sure certain things were banned and not allowed to be on the sites and so on and so forth. You never would have known. So everybody being like, well, Twitter's a private company. They can do whatever they want. First Amendment's about government censorship. Oh, well, it turns out the government was actually the one asking him to do with the censoring. You wouldn't know. That's like a massive epistemic blind spot to this worldview. So even to the extent that they're like, yeah, corporate corruption's a problem, they still can't see that they will always be behind the eight ball and always duped unless they can kind of like keep that Hydra pinned somehow. But their response just seems to be, let corporations do whatever they want, and if they work with government, we don't figure out till like 5 years after the fact. Oops, I guess we'll have to react and hope we haven't lost too many generations of Americans to whatever propaganda like befell them. But if we did, it's up to them but to pull themselves up by their bootstraps anyway. Sorry you're propagandized for like the first 18 years of your life or whatever, but figure it out. Some black guy down the street named Tim Scott did it. You can too. Like, what kind of message is this?
One that's calculated to fail.
Yes. Absolutely.
Do you have a lobbyist? Because I don't.
I think it's both, right? And I think this is why the battle between DeSantis and Disney was so instructive. Again, we saw what the typical garden variety Republican, how they would respond to the largest employer in their state exerting political and economic pressure on them.
Yeah.
That response is to fold. So yes, the tyranny is coming both.
Another good example of folding was Kristi Noem, who used to be a darling because she didn't go with the lockdowns, but then folded on transgender women in sports.
Oh, she did end up folding on that? Wow, I forgot to follow that story. Shoot.
I mean, oh yeah, base Kristi Noem didn't go with the lockdowns.
Yeah.
From that partnership where the government says we can't directly censor people, but we will be in contact with social media companies to get them to censor people. So I think any candidate has to be able to articulate clearly how they would bring corporate America to heel. To say, look, we believe in the free markets. As conservatives, we believe in the free markets. What we don't believe in is allowing corporations to dictate policy to duly elected officials that have been chosen by the American people.
So, Kim, I'd like you to chime in on this. I'm sorry, Jill. The idea that these corporations are dictating to everybody. You look at Target. You look at what's happening there. You look at Budweiser. The entire Anheuser-Busch Corporation is now starting to have problems. Are we at the end of this, or is this just the end of the first battle?
I feel like it is.
What do you think about that
battle.
question?
I don't think.
So wait, so are we at the end of? Oh, because of the Anheuser-Busch.
Yeah, are these corporations going to start folding because of the boycotts?
No,
Or is this just the first battle?
no, they're not going to fold.
Of course they're not going to fold. Like, I don't know why Glenn would even think it's smart to ask that question.
Okay.
Like, of course.
No, you know why he asks the question, and this is what we've been pounding on for the last month. All of this cultural rot that he doesn't like stems directly from the corporations. It always has. I mean, didn't you say in the documentary, What is a Woman, they actually talk about Kinsey?
Yeah.
Okay, then why the heck did we not know? How is this not common knowledge yet?
I don't know, man.
The all of the cultural changes we've seen since 1945 have been the direct result of corporate interference in our society. And we just blame academics, we blame the government, and it's like, it doesn't work because it keeps going faster and faster and faster, which means that they're not the ones driving it. It's the corporations driving it. And if you knew that, you'd realize that the question Glenn Beck is asking is a very silly one.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to be the end of this because we have finally on the right seen a successful boycott of a large company. And we haven't had that kind of sustainability on the right before. And now that we have a little taste, a little sense of, oh my gosh, we actually won something. We can do this. I think that this will continue on, but not only on the corporation side, Glenn, but what I would love to hear is small business talk, right? Because have you been forced to close your small business since COVID? Have you had to take on a second job since COVID? Because
they're talking about the corporations. They can't help themselves. They
No.
put it back to government bad.
Government bad, lockdowns, but you know who didn't have to shut down? You know who could keep going with the lockdowns logos? The corporation, the big ones.
The corporate, yep, it's true.
And guess what? I would not be surprised if the lockdowns were part of an elaborate plan to eliminate competition from small businesses.
Definitely. Tucker even talked about that. And then like Sean Hannity got on. Did you see that clip? that clip was bizarre.
No.
Like Sean Hannity gets on after Tucker. Like Tucker's going on about like how Jeff Bezos is making a bunch of money and how this might be a play by Amazon or whatever. And then like Tucker's like handing it off to Hannity like he always does. And Hannity's just like, well, Tucker, I for one, I'm happy with the success that Jeff Bezos is having. And I think excess wealth, getting that money, that's America, man. And Tucker just was looking at this bizarre look on his face, like, really? Now?
Yeah. Okay. You're right. They Logos, they just can't help themselves. Like you said.
This is what they're trying to do. You aren't going to have that easy life that we all had, growing up in the 90s and beyond. You have to fight for everything that you have right now, and that's the point. That's what they want to have. It's not just going to be a relaxed, easy thing, especially if you're on the right. But with the corporations coming up later in the show, we're going to have Nikki Haley on the stage with Tucker Carlson, and it is really concerning that somebody that is going to be on that stage today came out on Tucker's show and said, well, if they don't want you in Florida, we'll take you in South Carolina. Come on over. I'll help you get here. To me, having that kind of a mindset shows me that you don't understand where we are at this place in time. The corporations, all the fights that are going on within the corporations, but also just from the public-private partnerships like you're talking about. It's so big right now. It's so massive. And it shouldn't be something that is going to be applauded at a summit like this.
You know what's crazy? I'm listening to you, and I'm agreeing with everything you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So they're about to like move topics, but I don't want to lose this one. Did you catch where she's just like, think about the people having to work like 2 jobs to make it. They want you to fight for everything you had.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be easy like it was in the 90s. It's like, do you know what was happening in the 90s? Like if you look at the 90s and early 2000s, prior to 2008, you can see credit card debt just going up and up and up and up and up. That's a really good measurement of like how hard people are having it right now.
Well, think about this, Logos. Do you remember the 2008 documentary IOUSA?
Yeah.
It was a bipartisan. They had Democrats and they had Republicans, including Ron Paul. They talked about the Federal Reserve Bank and credit card debt and living within your means. See, that's another thing. Glenn Beck just said earlier in one of the timestamps we used, live within your means and pay your debts. Well, if you're on credit cards, you're not living within your means.
Exactly.
So no, these people were not living within their means.
Yeah. This whole thing just strikes me as tone deaf, right? There are a whole bunch of people for a while who have been getting really hurt by a lot of massive changes in the economy. Just think about households. We had single income households with no high school diplomas, with high school diplomas being breadwinners for a whole family. And suddenly we've got like 2 income households living paycheck to paycheck. Like they do surveys on this. Do you have enough money for retirement? Do you have enough money for a $2,000 emergency? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
They've been getting worse and worse and worse. It's finally reached a fever pitch so high, it's now starting to affect them.
Yeah.
So now they're talking about it.
Okay.
And then they're going to lecture us about whether we know what time it is.
Let me contextualize all this, right? I didn't see the movie, but like there were ads for this all over the place. The Sound of Freedom with Jim Caviezel and child trafficking. One of the clips was he says to one of his buddies from like, I guess, whatever SOF group he was, you have to do this with me because if you don't stop it over there where they start trafficking the kids, it's going to come to your backyard. And if you don't stop the rot there, it will get to you. Well, this is what happened, Logos. Nobody stopped the rot. And now it's getting to them.
And so now they're going to talk about it. But what they want to do is push it just far enough back that their lives become comfortable again and screw everybody else that has been getting screwed over by the system for decades. And then they wonder why so many people are flocking to the left.
Well, Logos, one word, 1917, a rerun.
I mean, all I have to say for these people that are mad about how hard things are right now is, have you thought about taking personal responsibility?
Have you thought about bootstrapping it?
Yeah, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, guys. What's the problem?
The Munchausen dilemma, right, Adam? Right, Logos?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep going.
I'm thinking to myself, this is CNN 25 years ago. This is what people on the left were saying 25 years ago.
Yep.
And we've really kind of switched sides in a way. I think we've come to our senses, and now they've gone nuts. and we're on the opposite side.
What's happened is fascism. That's the traditional definition of fascism. The collusion of elites in the public and private sector with the intent of dominating the wider populace. And that's what's occurring here. And, typically there are every generation in American politics some form of major political realignment. And a lot of people think we haven't had one since the emergence of the old religious right 40 years ago. But we did. We had one. It was just in the boardrooms of corporate America.
Correct.
True believers took over. Not people who are not the people who just gave money to Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton to make it go away.
No.
I paid my tithe. Now don't shake me down and let me move on. These are real corporate drivers of these woke pagan initiatives, anti-American globalistic initiatives. They believe in it, and that's why they won't be pressured by the garden variety. I mean, I've been sitting here waiting, Glenn, for a Disney shareholder or a group of them to say, we're at 2014 market levels right now. We've lost $1 billion at the box office in the half of the fiscal year.
But
what are we doing here? I'm suing your ass for malfeasance.
But the problem is the way Disney works is they take the guy who was running the parks or running the movies, and then they put him, the head of ABC television, then he becomes the CEO. They keep pulling from inside, and that company is so deeply infected by activists. I honestly don't think the shareholders can do anything about it, because it's like the federal government. You're going to have to clear out all of them and reset the country, the company.
That's a question, Oran, I want to ask you. Because
clear them out. Is he doing his AA imitation, Logos?
Yeah, right. Oh, Oren's about to say something real based here, so let's get.
We got to get to our boy Oren.
Yeah, we have seen a successful boycott because we have clearly hurt them, but they haven't backed away at all. So the debate I think that we are having is there any price point? Is there any amount of damage that we could do to these companies where shareholders rise up with class action suits and say, enough, we can't lose this kind of money anymore, or we back them down? Or how high and deep is that commitment level? What would you say?
I think conservatives are learning a really important lesson that there are no neutral institutions. There never was this neutral marketplace where corporations and educational institutions and media would just play it down the middle. We would be able to section off what these corporations do from their values. And because the conservative movement treated these things as two separate places, two separate marketplaces where neutrality could exist, the left was able to infiltrate all of these places with their values because there is no neutral space. And now those values are deeply entrenched. All of these mid-level managers, they're not interested about the overall profitability of these corporations. They're interested in their next job. And having a failing corporation profitability-wise is not as bad as being called a racist.
Say that one more time. Repeat that. That's one of the most important things we have said so far, I think, today on Blaze TV. Say that again.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical to understand that these bureaucratic managers care more about their next job than profits. And getting a job is based on your political viability, not your profitability. And so if you want to go from Anheuser-Busch to your next corporate job, it doesn't matter if you lost money. It matters if you got called to train.
So here's something too, right? So to segue in with what Tucker's saying, or not Tucker, Oren McIntyre, one of the things that the sort of Wall Street angle that Sutton gets at, and that a certain kind of libertarian critique gets at, is that there's business. You could have quote unquote free market competition where you generate profit and value that way, or you can have the political economy where you play the political angle of things to get money. Now, on the one hand, you have this contradictory narrative that one, it's unfair because they're always getting away with it. But on the other hand, that a real free market would be so efficient, it would just sweep all of this away. Now, we can go back to Frederick C. Howe's Confession of a Monopolist, 1906. For well over 100 years, those businessmen that have made the political play have always won. They always do. So just stop complaining about it and do something, because we have well over 100 years of men doing this and they win. And now, again, it's not like it's amazing this is just dawning on people, right? Because if you look at the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and the Fords, specifically the Reese Committee, which was a congressional investigation in the 50s, these people were all about changing the society with their money. And we're only now figuring it out, Logos, 120 years later. It's amazing.
Yep.
So, I mean, props to Oren to say it. No one's saying it yet, but like we had a breadcrumb trail, we had a paper trail that just seemed to got lost.
Well, here's the problem, though. Aaron McIntyre is like 10 times smarter than anybody else in that room, but there's still a lot of elements he's missing, right?
Mhm.
Aaron's talking about the base level of like your DEI, your gender studies graduate working in HR or DEI, getting promoted to management, and getting among that clique. He still, it seems to be going implicitly off the cathedral model, where there are these cliques that take a political hold of a bunch of peers that are responsible for hiring and firing each other at these corporations. And being within your peer group is more important than the exterior thing of like the profitability of the corporation, right? That attacks the meritocratic assumptions, right? It's not about your merit that gets you ahead. It's about how well you survive in your clique. That's important. But what Arn isn't even talking about is it's not just about like the cathedral and cliques that a company. It's what do the companies do with their profits, even if they were working at maximal market efficiency? And that's what you were getting at. So like,
well, they create the culture war.
Literally.
So when who followed right after Tucker Carlson in that clip that I didn't watch?
Who did what now?
Who followed right after Tucker Carlson in the clip that I didn't watch?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, there was a clip. You said Tucker Carlson said something, then he handed
Oh, yeah, Hannity. It was Sean Hannity. Yeah.
Yeah, he said, oh, no, he's okay. He's happy that Bezos made all this surplus money because that's the American way. Well, that surplus that Jeff Bezos is making is where the culture war comes from.
Exactly. And
the
that's
culture war that you've been losing for the last 70 years.
Right. Now, to be fair to Aaron, he wasn't asked to go into the full dive. He was asked a very specific question.
Sure.
He was asked, what will it take for shareholders to sue these companies for malfeasance? When will they back down? And Aaron's explaining why, even if the shareholders aren't happy, these people aren't going to back down because they're true believers. And here's what they really have to impress. That dimension of it's one thing.
No, fair enough. Yeah, true.
Yeah. The other dimension, though, that Aaron could have said was, listen, shareholders are just bought the lie that corporate okay, there's a couple of things that are really weird here, right? A lot of stocks are no longer paying dividends. I saw a really interesting rant about this by the guy that was on Shark Tank. I think he owns a baseball team. He was going on a rant about how, stocks don't matter. This is basically like trading cards for boomers or whatever, because like stocks aren't paying dividends. They're just like status symbols. So the idea that shareholders are going to care about profit anyway, when really what's more important is status symbols and how likable the stock is if it's not paying dividends, that's an interesting thing they have to grapple with, right? So I don't know whether Disney pays dividends or not. That's a specific example, but they're talking about this as a generalization for the whole economy, okay? If you have a bunch of companies that don't pay dividends, like Twitter, for example, is like unprofitable forever, right? It's not like its stock value correlated with its profits because it wasn't profitable. At a certain to a certain extent, stocks are status symbols. And so the company itself is a beacon of status that they have to try to do. It's not even clear that profit's a thing they're maximizing for shareholders who care about stock price anymore. But even if everybody's assuming these companies are trying to maximize profits, the other thing Oren could talk about is if they win, what do they do with those profits anyway? Some of it goes into stock buybacks, some goes into R&D, some goes into somebody's third yacht, who cares? But a lot of it goes into political lobbying, tons of it.
Yep. Now, are we done with this timestamp? Because I think really after Oren, they change.
They do. Yeah, I think that's where I wanted to get to with that one. Now let's talk about the final act, right? So here's a bunch of shibboleths. We're 25 years late. Here's what we don't know about corporations.
Yep.
Oops. Now we're talking about...
We're almost here. We're almost here.
That's right. Do we know what time it is?
Yeah. Do we know what time it is? Okay.
Corporations are dictating to everybody. You look at Target, you look at what's happening there.
Oh, that's the same clip.
You look at Budweiser.
Oh, I did, yeah. Well, hold up. Well, it's the same clip logos. They've always been dictating to everybody.
Always.
That's the joke. Yeah, sorry. Oh, you have two timestamp 6s. That's why I got confused. Okay. Let's try this again. Here we go.
I want to just take a step back and think about what this type of forum, all these presidential candidates, Republican presidential candidates, coming to talk one-on-one with, one of the biggest names in conservative media. And, maybe a decade ago, they would have been asked questions about low taxes.
Right.
They would have been asked questions about abortion. They would have been asked questions about government spending, and the debt ceiling. And now we have been, the GOP messaging and GOP leaders have been, I would argue, so weak in playing offense rather than just playing defense up against a wall, that we're sitting here and we actually have candidates who are being asked questions about whether or not they support the mutilation of children or irreversible damage done to their bodies. Spoiler alert, at least one of them does actually agree that they should have irreversible harm done to their bodies. They're being asked questions about, whether they support a proxy war in Ukraine. They're being asked questions about whether we even have free and fair elections at all. And it feels like our backs are so far against the wall at this point, because we have moved so far from, the conservative platform and the party ideals to just, hey, can we just get to a more sane place? Is that possible? And it's very scary to me to think about how quick it's taken us to shift and devolve so far downhill. Delano, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, Sarah. I mean, we have elections, we elect candidates to represent us, but the candidates have to be sensitive to the times, right? So I know on the new right, there's a phrase like candidates need to know what time it is. Sometimes when you hear some Republicans speak, they don't even know what year it is, right? They're still trying to run the old playbook, and I love what you brought up about Pence and his unwillingness to face down corporate America. And again, I brought this up on the last panel. This is something that's going to come up in the Republican primary. And Mike Pence did the same thing Nikki Haley did when he criticized Governor DeSantis about his handling of the Disney issue, and then he said, "Well, I don't think that as conservatives we should be in business of telling businesses what to do." And my thing is this: these corporations hate us, they hate our values, they have no problem indoctrinating our children, and whether that's through their content, or they have no problem subverting the will of the people as it relates to trying to overturn laws that are passed by duly elected representatives. And I think the Republican Party has to get a hold on its proclivities towards what I call mammon conservatism. The Bible says you cannot serve God and mammon at the same time. And for so long, the only thing that mattered to Republicans was green. But now we're in a different era. We need different candidates who can articulate a vision of the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts?
Well, amen to that. I mean, what this reminds me of is, you said, conservatism with its back against the wall. I think the good news about today, and one of the central stories of the day, the central story so far for me, is that Tucker Carlson has these Republican candidates' backs up against the wall.
Okay, I think that was pretty much it, right, Logos?
Basically, yeah. I mean, they probably, I think that Mike Long might have said it, but we get the gist.
Yeah, well, we didn't get the clip where Steve said to Glenn Beck that we won't have 30 years if Biden or the Democrats get a second term.
He did say that.
We just didn't watch that part tonight, but he did say that. So okay, what time is it? 25 years too late. We don't have 30 years according to Steve, and we're still 20 years late. 25 years late. So the math is not looking good, Logos.
Exactly. I mean, here are the broad themes for me. The Republicans are now starting to acknowledge, the cutting edge ones, quote unquote, just acknowledge in that clip that systems matter. We are not individual atomized islands that pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Corporations can propagandize our children. Corporations can subvert the will of the people and overturn democracy in a way that makes things worse for lots of people. They are now discovering systems and systemic effects, which the left has been talking about forever. And if they're finally going to get to the conversation 25 years later and say, hey, corporations can do bad things, and that's basically where we're at. They're not even at like 1960s left, and we only have 30 years left. We're in trouble, right? As much as people want to, play cutting edge with this thing, I think Oren could hang with the conversation here. I think nobody else that panel probably could. We, the Republicans, the right, broadly, as a representative of the mainstream culture, don't know what time it is. That's basically my thesis after seeing this.
Yeah, like the American right doesn't know what time it is, and the other problem is this cancellation, right? I mean, we have the whole Paul Gottfried angle of all these dissident right-wing thinkers who got canceled by the right-wing establishment that was run by William F. Buckley Jr. and Frank Chodorov. A lot of these guys were pointing the finger at corporations, sort of. I mean, the John Birch Society blamed it on communists when actually it's the other way around. We blame the communists on Wall Street. But they were at least in the ballpark, right? But the John Birch Society got sidelined, and other groups that could have. Sutton got sidelined, right? He was working for the Hoover Institute, a flagship conservative think tank, and he just got boop. You're done. So
there we go. I mean, that's basically my closing statement. They don't know what time it is. We're in big trouble if that's cutting edge commentary at the moment.
Okay, I guess we just need Tucker Carlson and Hawes for Occupy Wall Street 2.0 Red Brown Alliance.
Based.
All right, this is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast signing off.